Welcome all. Welcome to another session with a very well-known astrologer who is going to be able to talk to us about one of our favorite topics. It's a topic that we all become engaged in, either because we want to, we don't want to, or we already have. And that is the wonderful world of marriage. Now, the person who's going to talk to us about this is our very favorite Marc Boney. So Marc, please take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. Well, I should clarify that we're not going to just be talking about marriage in the astrological sense in general. We're going to be talking primarily about the timing of marriage, right?
The timing of marriage, and I need also to tell people to be patient because this is going to be a two-part series. So this first part is going to focus on Parashal's opinion of this beautiful subject, and secondly, it will be Jaimini's opinion. So there we go, Marc.
All right. And so when I say timing of marriage, included in that is what I would call the timing of a relationship. When a serious relationship comes into a person's life, may turn into a marriage-like situation if they're living together, may not be legal sacramental marriage, but they show up in the same way astrologically. Okay? Mm-hmm. And as Kay and Ram, my teacher, used to say, if you're going to if you're going to time any event, if you're going to predict any event, you need some set of predictive parameters. You need some methodology for doing this, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. His preferred method that he taught was what he called the composite technique. What that meant is that you're not just looking at the timing in just one system, but you're looking at it in two systems, and the two systems were, on the one hand, the Parashari system, and on the other hand, the Jaimini system, because there are two completely different ways of looking at a question with mm-hmm. two completely different timing mechanisms. And the idea is that you wanted to try to get these to line up.
Fantasy.
Let's call that confluence. And the analogy I like to use is that, everybody's probably familiar with a slot machine, right? That when you hit the jackpot, all the symbols across the top line up. Okay? Mm-hmm. So what you're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do when I try to predict this, is have the systems line up, but also line up not just with dashas, but transits. Right? Mm-hmm. And another favorite saying of his is that it's a poor astrologer that only has one dasha. Because, of course, dashas are the tools with which Jyotishis predict. Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he always used to emphasize dashas first, transits second. And actually, if he was really trying to zero in on predicting an event, he would use maybe up to 5 dashas at times, combinations of Parashari planetary dashas and Jaimini sign-based dashas. So this is the approach that I learned. This is the approach that I've taken. And this is the approach that has allowed me to have, a good deal of success at predicting this event, which is a very frequent question. In fact, this question about when would a relationship come into my life, when would I marry, is probably a question that I've gotten more than any other in my astrological career. And when K. N. Rao came to the U.S., he ended up saying this was the number one question that he always encountered. Okay? Number one question. And so that phrase we used the last time, Phyllis, where I said, people want to know about their money or their honey. This is the honey aspect of it. Okay. So now, I'm going to share my screen. And if you would please acknowledge that you're seeing a document entitled Predicting Marriage Using the Composite Technique. Yes, you're seeing that? By the way, I'm not hearing either of you. Your mics are mute.
Yes, Marc, we can hear you. Phyllis,
Okay. So I wanted to start off by going through what I would just call the anatomy of a prediction. I'd like to take people through a process that I went through when asked to predict about marriage on the chart that you see before you. This man, who was an Indian individual living in Nepal at the time, approached me for a consultation. I believe it was either in the very end of 2013, 2014. And the interesting thing about his background is that he shared with me, confessed to me, that he had never ever had a relationship before, not even so much as dated someone. And but he was now in his mid-30s and wanted to know two things. He wanted to know I thought that he would ever marry, and then he also wanted to know when that would likely to happen. So these are the typical kind of questions that one gets as an astrologer, right? So, at the time that he was asking me this question, in the Vimshottari Dasha, he was running, I believe, Saturn Moon. And so that's what I was looking at first. I was looking at the dashas coming up in terms of sub-periods within Saturn, asking myself the question is, does Saturn show any eligibility for bringing this event? Okay. And in particular, the period Saturn-Rahu. Now, one thing I'll go on to say that there are certain periods and sub-periods like Venus-Rahu and Rahu-Venus, and then also to a lesser degree, Saturn-Rahu and Rahu-Saturn, that can give this event independent of any placement or disposition within the birth chart. Okay. K and Rao just referred to them as what he called a Yogaj combination that can give a certain effect regardless of its placements or its lordships. Rahu-Venus, Venus-Rahu, very much so. To a lesser degree, Rahu-Saturn, Saturn-Rahu. So I saw that this person was going to be coming up to his Saturn-Rahu period. I also saw that these planets fall in the 7th house from the moon. Right? So, of course, we interpret, Vimshottari Dasha using Chandra Lagna as well, right? Mm-hmm. So that really signaled some eligibility for me. And I saw that this person was going to be moving into this period in the end of 2015. Now, simultaneously, I also saw that in the Jaimini system, he was going to start running the major period of Sagittarius. So now what strikes you about Sagittarius? Of course, it's the 7th house of his birth chart, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if you see the planet there and you see its degrees, you'll see that it's the planet with the lowest degrees amongst all the grahas, excluding Rahu and Ketu, which makes it his Dharakaraka, indicator of spouse. Mm-hmm. So this rather got my attention. Okay. And to make a long story short, I predicted, this was back again in later 2013, 2014, that I thought he would marry, number one. And part of that was based on the fact he does have an exalted 7th Lord Jupiter, okay, retrograde, which makes its results sometimes a little unreliable. And he does have Mars as the 6th Lord, not a good planet for this Lagna in the 7th house. And there are some issues in the Navamsha as well, but I did think he would marry, and I thought the earliest that would probably happen was in the spring of 2016. Now, additionally, I was making this prediction based on seeing something else as well. I use another planetary dasha called Yogini, right? It's a dasha that's 36 years in length, right? So it's much shorter than the Vimshottari dasha. And I saw that coinciding with these other two periods that I was seeing in Vimshottari and Chara, I saw that he was going to be running Mars in Yogini during this same time period. So now all the bananas on the slot machine were lining up.
Two of them were. Mm-hmm.
The 3 dashas were lining up, and then I come to transits. Now, a principle that K. N. Rao always taught his students is that when a major event is happening in a person's life, typically you see the double influence of both simultaneously Jupiter and Saturn aspecting onto a particular point in the chart. In this case, we'd be looking for aspecting onto the 7th house and the 7th Lord. And I saw that in early 2016, Jupiter was going to be transiting through Leo, which from there would, of course, be making aspect onto his 7th house Sagittarius, Prashri aspect, right? Now, a principle that he uses when doing this is that if a planet's retrograde, it will aspect also as if from the sign prior to it. He always referred to this as a Bhrighu principle. And of course, I was aware that Saturn was in Scorpio, but during this period it was going to be retrograde, therefore aspecting as if from Libra, and therefore also aspecting onto the 7th house. Mm-hmm. Now, one other thing that he taught me was something called the Vivaha Saham, or the marriage point. It's a calculation that comes about by taking the zodiacal longitude and latitude of the 1st Lord, in this case Gemini, and also the 7th Lord, in this case Jupiter, and adding them up. And then, taking out multiples of 12 and all that sort of thing if you get more than 12 signs. But to make a long story short, if you make that calculation, you will wind up with the marriage point in Aquarius. where if you have Jupiter aspecting onto the marriage point, this also adds additional evidence. Okay? Now remember, Jupiter was in Leo, therefore aspecting onto Aquarius. So this was the anatomy of my prediction. Okay? And I told him that for these reasons, I thought this time, spring of 2016, he could marry. Now, in the meantime, he emigrated from Nepal to move to Canada. But to make a long story short, he connected with a woman back in India in the way many people connect these days, through a dating site. And he ended up getting married in April of 2016.
Good for him and good for you. This is valuable. Our viewers are really going to enjoy how concise this is.
Well, I hope so. But what I'm just really, the credit goes to K and Rao. What I'm just showing them is, what K and Rao taught me to do in terms of how to approach this question. And the two together, particularly, as I said, Parashari with Jaimini, is the thing that really increases, I think, your chances of predictive accuracy. That when you see something in both, it is more assured that you're seeing something that's real. Now, I must also say that these periods can line up like this, and a person could already be married, and it's not necessarily they're going to marry during this time, right? And so, but when you're asked the question, how do you go about seeing this? So now, what I want to talk about then is back up a little bit and just, when we're evaluating this question from the Parashari point of view, it starts with looking at the static potential in the birth chart, as you well know, Phyllis. I like to say that apples don't grow on pear trees.
That's true. The foundation. What is marriage to you? Are you a candidate? What are you going to take to it? It's you first, not your partner.
Sure. What's this? What is your karma in this area to begin with? Just as you're not, someone might want you to predict fame and fortune for them, but if their chart doesn't show the karma for fame and fortune, there's no period that you're going to be running that's going to necessarily bring that, right?
That's because you did it wrong.
Apparently.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And then he has these team of researchers that have gone through his school in Delhi, the 2-year program. And one of the things they've really looked at is looking at charts in terms of seeing which charts fall in one of 4 categories, or primarily one of 4 categories. I'm showing those here. Charts that would indicate early marriage. Right? Marilyn Monroe actually got married when she was 16 years old for the first time. And so there's early marriage, and then there's what they refer to as age-appropriate marriage, which would mean when it would be appropriate a time in a particular culture that a person would marriage. In the U.S. at the moment, young adults marry typically between age 25 and 35 these days. Right? It tends to happen later. Doesn't mean they don't get into relationships earlier, but in terms of actual marriage. And then there's charts that show delayed marriage. Strong influence of Saturn on 7th house, 7th lord, Karaka, Venus, and so forth, both in the birth chart and Navamsha, can definitely show delay of marriage. And then there are some charts where it's not the karma in this lifetime to marry. And so doing an initial assessment about one's karmic potentials in relationship is something that is an actual first step. And as you see from my notes here, the way we go about doing that is first of all evaluating the karaka of this event, both in the birth chart and in the Navamsha. What house does it fall in? What's its condition? Is it with the influence of natural benefics? Is it with the influence of natural malefics? This is all going to give you some read on a person's karma within relationships. Now, I get asked the question, is that true for both men and women? My answer to that is yes. The answer is yes.
I was going to ask that for clarity because that's important to know. It applies to.
It comes up. And of course, you're evaluating the 7th house and the 7th lord, but not just from the birth lagna, also from Chandra lagna. And then if you're really being thorough about it, you're looking at things from the standpoint of using Karaka Venus as if it were a lagna and seeing the 7th house, 7th lord from there.
And what about using Jupiter for women as maybe a 4th step or an additional step?
It's not something I do. I know it exists within the tradition, okay? It's not, in my experience, using these parameters for both men and women, you'll get a good feedback, a good read. Right?
Okay,
Now,
that's good.
sometimes the picture is very confluent. Everything looks mostly good, and sometimes it's very confluent the other way. Mostly things look very challenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
But usually you get a mixed picture, right? Usually you get a mixed picture, and then you have to sort of weigh up different factors. And, if you talk to people who are married, they'll tell you that it's oftentimes a very mixed experience, right? There's
On occasion, yes, on occasion.
good things about it, also challenging things about it. But now, let me come to different simple Parashari predictive parameters that I've utilized those in order to successfully predict. Now, the easiest thing, and it doesn't happen that often, is that, you'll see that a person's coming to a period of planets in the 7th house or ruling the 7th house, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm showing the chart here of Jackie Kennedy. She actually met and married John F. Kennedy in the major period of the moon, sub-period of Rahu.
Sub-period of?
Rahu, major period of the moon, sub-period of Rahu. It's the two planets together in her 7th house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, nothing could hardly be easier about that. Right?
No.
But then, this very principle, understanding this principle allowed me to make a prediction on this chart. This woman approached me in mid-1990s. I just started learning Jyotish and wanted to know, she'd been divorced and wanted to know if she was going to marry again, and if so, when. She was running her Jupiter major period. I told her I thought fairly certain that she would marry again, but, probably wouldn't be for another 3 years. Well, she didn't like that answer because it seemed like a little far away. But what I was looking at the major period of Jupiter, sub-period of Venus, 2 planets in her 7th house. Mm-hmm. And again, a long story short, when this sub-period of Jupiter, Venus did come, she did in fact marry during that time. Mm-hmm. But then sometimes, as you well know, people will marry in periods that have nothing to do with the 7th house and the 7th lord in the birth chart. Mm-hmm. And that's why one of the tools that we use to time marriage, an indispensable tool, critical tool, is, of course, the Navamsha, which is the divisional chart specifically having to do with karma with marriage. Now, one problem with that is that sometimes their birth times are not accurate enough to give an accurate Navamsha Lagna. I'm going to show some methods for getting around that. Right? But,
okay, that's good.
But of course, if you do have an accurate enough birth time to give an accurate Navamsha Lagna, well, then you have a much more precise tool with which to work. Now, many people may be aware of the old movie star Ava Gardner, who had a very famous public marriage with Frank Sinatra. You probably remember that, right? Or know of it.
Just, yeah, I'm not mature.
And this happened in the major period of Mercury, sub-period of Mercury, sub-period of Mars. Well, if you look at her birth chart and you try to think why she would have married in Mercury, Mars, there's really nothing here you could point to that would tend to suggest that event. Right? They're just not connected to the 7th house of the 7th lord, even from various angles. But if you look at her Navamsha, it becomes perfectly obvious. Mercury, Mars. Mercury is the Lagna Lord, in the Lagna Lord exalted in her Navamsha, right? Mm-hmm. And Mars is on the other side in the 7th house. So the principle I'm talking about here is that when planets along the 1-7 axis of the birth chart can bring this event, but of course planets along the 1-7 axis of the Navamsha also become very eligible for bringing this timing, particularly planets in the Navamsha Lagna and also, of course, the 7th house. And then, of course, if you run periods and subperiods or periods and sub-subperiods of these planets, this is when you'll actually often see the event happen. To see another example of this, another famous Hollywood movie star, Steve McQueen, married his first wife, Neil Adams, in 1956. It was the major period of Rahu, sub-period of Mercury in the Vimshottari Dasha. Well, again, if you look at his Rashi, and you look at Rahu, they're in the 10th house, and you look at Mercury, Lord of the 3rd and the 12th, mm-hmm. There's not a lot of, it wouldn't occur to you that this would be a period and sub-period that marry, right? But if you saw his Navamsha and you understood what I'm talking about here in terms of an approach to timing marriage, you'll see these two grahas, right, sitting in the lagna of his Navamsha. And of course, in this period and sub-period that he did marry. This is the kind of thing I've seen time and time again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not just grahas along the 1-7 axis of the birth chart, but grahas along the 1-7 axis of Navamsha, particularly if they're in the lagna of the right? Now, having seen this, I once was able to then give a prediction based on this idea. This woman was a work colleague of mine who came into work one day and announced she was very distraught. She was actually crying. Announced that her husband of some 20, 30 years had decided to exit the marriage. Right? And so she was very upset about this. But later, you know, and she knew that I was an astrologer, she came up, she approached me and said, well, Mark, you know, I don't think I'll ever marry again. Is there any sign in my chart that I'd be able to do that? And what I told her, Phyllis, is that, well, you know, if your birth time is very accurate, I think you are going to marry again. And I think it's not that far away. Mm-hmm. Now, the divorce took place in major period of Mercury, sub-period of Saturn. So what comes next? Ketu, right? Ketu comes next. And if you look at her birth chart, her Ketu's in the 4th house with the moon. Doesn't really appear to have any connection with the idea of marriage, right? But now look at her Navamsha. Okay.
And there's Rahu.
Well, there's Ketu sitting in the 7th house.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely. Yeah.
Now I said, if your birth time is accurate, because if I go back and show you the Rashi, you'll see the degrees of the Rashi is 10, the Lagna are 10-4, right on the division line between a Navamsha. If you literally back up the birth time a matter of less than a minute, Navamsha Lagna changes. And if Navamsha Lagna changes, Moon and Ketu are no longer in the 7th house of Navamsha.
So her chart was right. Mm-hmm.
Well, I ended up predicting that a relationship would come into her life, possibly leading to marriage in the major period of Ketu, sub-period of the moon, and I was fortunate. It came out. It came out. Now, she did buy a home with this person in Ketu moon. They're in the 4th house of the Rashi. But it's the Navamsha that's showing the marriage or the relationship at that time. And if we don't have Navamsha, there's no way we see this, right? All right. And so going on here, now I talked about Rahu, Venus, and Venus, Rahu. This has been a major tool for me, a major technique. Whenever I see Rahu, Venus, or Venus, Rahu, and a person's asking me about the potential for relationships, I've come to understand that just running these periods and sub-period row alone shows a strong potential that way. And I've probably predicted, I don't know, maybe 10 marriages or 10 significant relationships at least based on this principle. I'll tell you a funny story about this. In 2014, I think it was, I was teaching in Russia to a class of about 50 people, mostly women. And I was talking about this principle. And I said, how many people have run either Rahu, Venus, or Venus, Rahu in their adult life, right? And did that period and sub-period bring a major love affair? And I would say a good 50%, half the hands went up. Right? Now, that's kind of a rather informal study, but this has been my experience. Now, I'm showing you the chart of Barack Obama, okay? Barack Obama, former president here. And he met Michelle and married Michelle in the major period of Rahu, sub-period of Venus. Now, if you look at these planets, you'll see that there's, again, you never get that idea just looking at them. Rahu's in the 8th with Mars. You know, Venus goes to the 6th. Rahu talked about Rahu and Venus Rahu as being like unqualified marriage givers. They can just give this event because they're Rahu and because they're Venus. And when you're running the period and sub-period of these planets together, that oftentimes does indicate a very fated love affair that a person comes into their life, potentially leading to marriage. Not always. Right? Not always. But then, You know, do you have any idea what the statistical odds or chances are of a woman past the age of 60 marrying in the U.S.?
No, I don't. I don't have that information.
They're astronomical. Okay, they're astronomical. But this woman at age 67 approached me, and she gave me the question. You know, do you see a relationship ever coming into my life? She had been married. She'd been divorced for a long time. And I saw that she was coming up to the period of Venus Rahu. Now, if you look at her Venus, you can see that it's got some problems, right?
Mm-hmm. Couple. Mm-hmm.
It's in the 6th house. It's in an exchange with the 6th Lord Mars, besides being aspected by it. And it's also aspected by the 8th Lord Saturn.
Mm-hmm. And right.
This is a challenge. If you take the 5th house aspect of Rahu, then you've got that too. This is a challenging picture. So this is what I would call rather a risky prediction, right? Mm-hmm. But you know, I explained to her what my experience had been with Venus Rahu Venus, and I just said there's certainly the chance that that would happen. Well, again, to make a long story short, it absolutely happened. And then it broke up for a period of time, but then he came back in Venus Jupiter. Notice that Jupiter is her 7th lord, right? Mm-hmm. And anyway, she had a major romance in Venus Rahu, and then she actually married in Venus, the subsequent period of Venus Jupiter. Right? And you know, this was some while back. She's, you know, in her early 70s now, and the relationship, I understand, is going strong. So good. I wanted to include this example just to show that, you know, it can happen at any age.
That's good. And, that's good.
And this is an individual that, you know, you can just start looking at some of the relationship indicators. You can see that it's a challenge here. Venus is truly debilitated. It gets the aspect of Saturn. The 7th Lord here, Moon, goes to the 12th with the 12th Lord, with Saturn, and aspected by Mars. Mm-hmm. So you see some challenging, and the Dharmakaraka here is Jupiter, who's, again, with Saturn, also gets the aspect of the GK. So we have some challenging patterns. But I told this woman in her early 50s that when she was coming up to the major period of Rahu, sub-period of Venus, remember the previous example was major period of Venus, sub-period of Rahu. Now we've got major period of Rahu, sub-period of Venus. I told her that there was a really strong potential for this happening. And to make a long story short, men just started coming out of the woodwork during this time. She had so many options that she actually was very conflicted about it. But she ended up then, you know, going with one gentleman, and they're not married, but they've been living in a marriage-like situation now for a number of years. Mm-hmm. So again, it's sometimes hard to distinguish between periods that will actually bring a legal sacramental marriage and those that will bring more like a marriage-like situation. Although if there's the involvement of Jupiter, who's kind of the, you know, the legal sacramental factor, typically it does then eventually end up in a marriage. So I always look out for Venus, Rahu, Venus periods, either in Vimshotri or also in another planetary dasha that I showed that I used, which is Yogini. But now I want to show you techniques of using the Navamsha where you don't have to rely on the correct Navamsha Lagna. Mm-hmm. They're very...
This will be enlightening.
Because in my researches, what I discovered is that when in the Navamsha, two planets are very strongly associated, very sambandha, that when a person runs the period and sub-period of those two planets, regardless of where they fall in the Navamsha, regardless of what houses they rule, that period and sub-period can prove very significant insofar as developments in a person's relationship life bring a relation into their life or even bring marriage. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the relationships that we're talking about are three in particular. When planets exchange in Navamsha, when planets are conjunct in Navamsha, and when planets are in a mutual glance. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, you know, there was this famous romance in Hollywood a long time between Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Right? Mm-hmm. They met on the set of this movie, Cleopatra. They were both married at the time. You know, they had got into this passionate affair. They ended up divorcing both of their spouses and marrying. This all happened for Elizabeth Taylor in her Saturn-Jupiter period. Now again, these planets don't really have much or any connection with 1-7 axis of a birth chart. They are 1-7 from each other. So if you use Saturn as a dasha lagna, Jupiter, the subperiod, is going to fall in the 7th from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So from that standpoint, you might be able to suggest that this period could bring some developments in a relationship life. But if you look at her Navamsha, look what's going on between Saturn and Jupiter. Right? They exchange.
Mm-hmm.
With Saturn as the Lagna Lord of this chart and Jupiter in the Lagna.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they ended up marrying 3 times.
Yes.
They got married 3 times.
Have to do it a couple times to get the hang of it.
But this is, her 7th house is very afflicted. I won't go into that. But, this was the timing of when this major love affair came into her life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you probably recognize the name of William Rehnquist, who was the Supreme Court Justice of the U.S. for 19 years, starting with Richard Nixon. Okay? Very, very famous member of the U.S. Judiciary, Supreme Court Justice. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, he married also in the same period and subperiod, major period of Saturn, subperiod of Jupiter. Now, Jupiter has some qualifications here because it aspects onto the 7th house.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, you'd be difficult to look at Saturn period and says, oh, yeah, this period's you're going to get married in this period. But if you look at Jupiter-Saturn again in Navamsha,
exchange.
again, with Saturn as the Lagna Lord and Jupiter in the Lagna.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, I don't know how many people in our audience, unless they're into literature, will recognize the name Anais Nin,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very early 20th century feminist and author and famous diarist, right? And so she got married initially in her major period of Mercury, subperiod of Venus. Okay. And, Mercury's the Lagna Lord here. Okay, it's connected in that way to the 1-7 axis. Venus is the Karaka of these things. It can always give it. So you can maybe make the case on the Rashi based on this. But look what happens here in Navamsha. Mercury, Venus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see the exchange.
Yes.
So the principle is that when someone asks me about timing of marriage and I see periods coming up where a period and subperiod of 2 planets involved in an exchange in Navamsha, I see that period and subperiod as being highly significant this way. Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes, Marc.
Very, very good. Very good example.
So now we come to the next kind of connection, conjunction. Mm-hmm. Albert Einstein, very famous scientist, first married January 6, 2003. It was in the major period of Venus, subperiod of Mars. And again, we can probably say, well, Venus can give this event just because it's Venus. But in what way would you see Mars in the birth chart as being eligible for bringing marriage? You would be hard-pressed to make that conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see in Navamsha, you'll see Venus and Mars conjunct. So the point I was making about this is that it's been my experience that if a person runs the period and subperiod of 2 planets conjunct in the Navamsha, and again, other factors, you'd be looking for other factors to support. I wouldn't make a prediction just based on this alone, but I would certainly see this kind of period and subperiod as being very eligible. And I have made successful predictions, based on just this simple idea. Of course, confirming that indication in other dasha systems and then seeing the transits as well. Now, a very interesting example of this is the actor Richard Dreyfuss. Right? And he first married in March of 1983. It was the major period of Mars, subperiod of Rahu. Now, in his case, seeing that on the basis of the birth chart, you could see how this period could give marriage. Rahu Ketu axis is right along the 1-7, right? Mm-hmm. And Mars, in this case, is going to be the 7th lord of the Rashi, of the birth chart. So marriage in Rahu, Mars, from just the standpoint of the birth chart, it was predictable. But then if you see his Navamsha, where you see that Mars and Rahu are together, then this just, really identifies this period as being very likely this way. Now, what's interesting is that this was his first marriage. What comes after Mars? Of course, the period of Rahu, right? And the last sub-period within Rahu is Rahu-Mars.
Yes.
Well, this is when he married for the second time. So he marries in, he marries in Mars-Rahu first, and then has a second marriage in Rahu-Mars, right, the reverse. And actually, in this case, he married a foreigner, which when Rahu-Ketu axis affects 1-7, which is something that could very often, we saw in the chart of Jacqueline Kennedy, that she had Rahu in her 7th house. Of course, she married Jack Kennedy, but then later, in 1968, in the major period of Rahu, sub-period of Rahu, she married Aristotle Onassis, who was Greek, a foreigner. So that influence again along the 1-7 axis of Rahu and Ketu. So as a final example of this, planets conjunct in Navamsha, I'm showing here the chart of the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who in September of 1908 married in the major period of the Moon, sub-period of Saturn. And again, if you just look at their placements in the Rashi, the Moon rules the 11th house, it's in the 12th. Saturn's the 5th and 6th Lord. Does make the aspect onto the 7th house, okay? But I don't think you'd ever look at Moon-Saturn and suggest that this would be a period where the person might marry. But if you look at his Navamsha, you'll see that these two planets are together in his Navamsha. So these are also periods, like exchanges in the Navamsha, that I pay a strong attention to. Now, the other connection that I talked about is mutual glance. When you have two planets that are 1-7 from each other, mutually aspecting each other in Navamsha. Okay? In Navamsha. And I'm showing you the chart of Hugh Hefner. And, there's some controversy about whether he's Leo Lagna or Virgo Lagna. His chart is based on birth time that comes from a birth certificate. I happen to think it might be Leo, not Virgo. You'd have to back up the birth time a little bit. But regardless of that, he first married in 1949 in the major period of Saturn, sub-period of Venus.
That's obvious.
That's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
It's obvious if you see Navamsha. It's not obvious. It's certainly not obvious if you're using Virgo Lagna and seeing it in the birth chart. And this is why the one Sanskrit classic by the son of Raha Mahira, Saravali, I think is the name of it, he says you can't make any progress in Jyotish without the use of divisional charts. This is what he was saying. And K.N. Rao used to say, the Vimshotri Dasha, if you're just trying to make predictions based on the Rashi, is rather a crude instrument. If you're using the divisional charts in Vimshotri Dasha, then it can become rather a precision timing instrument.
And the Navamsha is a reflection of the Nakshatras.
Yes, it is, of course. Yeah. So now, I want to show how I made use of this last principle, two planets that are in mutual aspect of each other in Navamsha, to make a prediction that I just recently found out came out. This man approached me in early 2016, and his question, he was approaching 30, or maybe he had crossed the age of 30, and his question was the typical question, will I marry, and if so, when? And I noticed that he was running or just started to get into his Mercury-Saturn period in Vimshotri. Well, now in this case, Saturn, the sub-period, is the Lord of the 7th house, right? So that becomes fairly eligible. Mercury, is not real clear why Mercury would bring marriage, but if you look at the Navamsha, you see that Mercury and Saturn are in a 1-7 relationship with each other. This really caught my eye. And, I saw he was going to be entering a period, say, in the first part of 2016, and I was trying to coordinate that with other dasha systems. I told you I use this dasha system called Yogini, right? And I saw that in the latter part of 2015, early 2016, he was going to be running his Jupiter-Rahu period in Yogini. Now, of course, Jupiter's in the 7th house of the birth chart, but now look at what you see in the Vamsha.
Oh.
Jupiter-Rahu right along the 1-7 axis there. Now, I saw that he was going to be running a period that also showed eligibility in Jaimini's Charadasha. Now come to transit. Remember that double Saturn-Jupiter influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this case, I saw that Jupiter was going to be in Virgo, from where it aspects onto the 7th house. And its place of birth, right? Saturn was going to be in Scorpio, returning to where Saturn was at birth, aspecting onto its own 7th house. So again, I'm showing you the anatomy of a prediction. Using multiple dasha systems with transits, and I'm sure I brought into play this Vivahasaham. I don't remember exactly what it was. Right? And I heard from him recently, or not recently, but not a while back. Actually, I had joked with him. I told him that if my prediction of marriage was to come true, what I would require of him is that he had to invite me to the wedding. and so when he got engaged, he invited me to the wedding, and he married in January of 2016. My understanding is that 4,000 people were at the wedding.
Oh.
Big Indian wedding, right?
Yes.
So this is an example of using this technique that I was talking about, mutual glance between two planets in the Vamsha. So, this is essentially what I wanted to share with you today. Of course, timing marriage can get more complicated, but I wanted to just sort of show some very simple, some straightforward techniques that have been successful for me. But mostly, I wanted to emphasize this idea of the composite technique, right? This idea of using multiple dashas and then transits in order to try to line up a period that shows real potential this way. So, this might be the first half of our discussion. When next we meet, I can go into much greater detail then about how we do this timing in the Jaimini system.
This is wonderful. Marc, you have given some very valuable information here, and I quite enjoy your examples. They're very clear, they're straightforward, and what is so important, this is a good reminder for more mature students. It's also a fabulous entry for the young folk, as Sunil calls them. So right on. You've done a great job, Marc. Thank you. And it's great seeing you again.
You're quite welcome, and I enjoy being on your show and sharing these things. So until we meet again.
We'll meet soon. Take care. Good night.
All right. Bye for now.